This antique map represents a legal decree. The crown relied on terra nullius, the claim that this continent was nobody's land. Map makers relegated the original inhabitants to the decorative margins. To colonizers, these weren't sovereign people, but a wild landscape to be managed by civilization. This assumption created an official history, a government record that framed conquest as orderly progress, omitting the cost of displacement. Peter Carey's Oscar and Lucinda is a work of historiographical metafiction, a novel that uses storytelling to interrogate and dismantle these very records. Carey disrupts the rigid Victorian social order by replacing the grand narrative of divine providence with the chaotic mechanics of chance and gambling. By following the lives of two obsessive gamblers, the novel exposes the violent, messy reality that the empire's polished history tried to hide. Understanding Australia's modern identity requires looking past the sanitized myth of divine progress to see the reckless human gamble of the colonial era. Carey's character Lucinda Laplastriere serves as a direct challenge to the gender codes of the era. She is a wealthy heiress who rejects corsets to buy and operate a glass manufacturing plant in Sydney. Her presence in the manufacturing world contradicts the Victorian assumption that the colonial economy was built and managed exclusively by men. Lucinda uses gambling as a tool of rebellion. In a society that demanded female passivity and domesticity, risking her fortune at the faro table was an act of personal agency. By centering a female factory owner, Carey reveals a version of the colony that official records often ignored. The archive prioritized male governors, while women building the territory's infrastructure were written out of the narrative. Oscar Hopkins is a priest who represents the center of the British mission, yet he embodies a fractured identity, a man of God who is hopelessly addicted to the racetrack. Oscar and Lucinda wager their fortunes on a mission to transport a glass church into the uncivilized outback. This is a clear instance of Orientalism, the belief that a foreign landscape must be justified by imposing a monument of Western culture upon it. The expedition leader, Jeffress, frames the journey as a scientific quest to measure the land. However, this obsession with naming and categorizing is actually a mechanism for imperial conquest. The reality of the expedition is violent. To transport their fragile glass monument, the party clears forests and tramples sites the indigenous inhabitants consider sacred. This journey proves that the spread of the church was often inseparable from a violent land grab, regardless of the religious justifications used to support it. To understand what Carey is doing, we have to look at the subaltern, a term used by theorist Gayatri Spivak to describe the groups historically silenced by dominant power structures. The Irish convicts were the first subaltern group. They were the forced labor that physically built the colony's infrastructure, yet their individual lives were treated as expendable by the state. The Aboriginal people are the ultimate subaltern group. In official colonial histories, their presence was reduced to a set of obstacles that needed to be removed to make way for progress. The Dark Wood Massacre in the novel stands in for the countless unrecorded atrocities that underpinned the settler narrative, giving a voice to those the official history tried to erase. When the glass church finally arrives, it is a dazzling but fragile symbol of British culture, imposed on a land that does not want it. The irony is that this monument to divine providence is eventually destroyed by the same forces of chance that Oscar and Lucinda worshipped. The glass church slides into the dark river, drowning Oscar inside the very structure he hoped would bring salvation. The sinking of the church is Carey's final rejection of colonial hubris. It suggests that fragile, exclusionary myths cannot survive the weight of the truths they suppress. Understanding the true past of a nation requires shattering sanitized histories and finally listening to the subaltern voices that were forced into the cracks.